I'm here at Prospect Park Hospital because my son's been sectioned today. The whole situation's been blown up out of proportion, and he's been sectioned completely unnecessary. As you know, that I've been trying to get support put into place for him, and yesterday it was finally agreed by the ICB and the council that a district nurse would be coming to visit him, which was a positive, but no previous meetings had been taken place, and we didn't know an actual plan, but we were told just arrive at 6 o'clock and the nurse will be there. So I got there for 6 and was waiting over an hour, and we thought that the nurse was possibly not coming, got in contact and nothing was happening, so left. And then about 8:30, Sean made contact and said that he said that he said that he said the care plan wasn't right, that it's asking him to do 5 units of insulin, so he asked us to come back again. So we went back, and when we arrived the diabetes nurse was there, and she said that she would be staying all night, and Sean was not comfortable with that because he's only in one small room with a little bedroom there. He's gone through such a lot of trauma in his life, and he's never met the lady before, so he told her he wasn't comfortable with it. So I suggested that perhaps she went upstairs to sit in the staff room, and so she agreed to that, and then I left again, and then I found out a little bit later that that he'd asked her to leave. So and then queried why, and then later found out that police were involved. So I went back, cycled back to Sean's at, it must have been about 11 o'clock at night, and when I arrived there was at least 4 police cars outside his place. There was an ambulance, and everything was, there was a lot of people. There was people from the supported living was stood there. And Sean was in the ambulance. He was completely stressed out, and at that point I didn't quite understand what had gone on. I just saw that he was clearly very distressed, even though when I'd left him he'd been fine. So I explained to the ambulance people, the police and all the people around, I said that he's having a sensory overload and that everything needed to be minimalised to just to leave him. He was handcuffed by 2 police officers and was really distressed. So so he was clearly stressed, so I told everybody, can you just back off? So anyway, I started to talk to him, have a little joke with him about him making me a nice cup of coffee because he loves his frothy coffee, and I wanted to distract him from the situation that was happening, and it seemed to be working. I said, would you like to make me and the police officers a cup of coffee? And he said yes, he'd do that. So then we walked out of the ambulance towards his place, where there was still a lot of people crowding. And then the mental health, as me and Sean were walking towards his place, a mental health nurse of some sort, mental health team, came up to me and wanted to know lots of questions and things, and I was like, this is not the time, Sean doesn't want this overload. And then everybody closed in, and then Sean just lost it, and I turned round to speak to the guy, and when I looked back, Sean was gone, and the ambulances were gone, the police car was gone, and that was about at that point it was getting on to midnight. So then after I was told that he'd been taken to the hospital and was in a place of safety. So then I found out from from the company, the nurse company, that what had actually happened was that Sean had said, will you please leave? And she said, I can't leave because I've been asked to stay here overnight. And he told her, I don't feel comfortable with this, I would like you to leave. And so she said that she would need to contact his next of kin. So she contacted the office where she works and said, Sean has asked me to leave. So yes, Sean's asked me to leave, so could I have the details of next of kin? So the care agency gave his next of kin, that's a crisis team, and so she called the crisis team, and the crisis team said the next of kin is social services, or to call social services. So she called social services, and she told social services that Sean had asked her to leave and that he'd now gone outside the property. And social services said, you need to call the police. So that's what she did. The police arrived. Sean had a complete meltdown. He didn't feel he was being listened to, and it all escalated to all these police coming in, then him going in the ambulance, and then moving forward to that, he was kept outside this hospital, Prospect Park, all day today, from midnight last night until 4 o'clock today, in the back of a police car with no food. He'd been given hot chocolate. I went into the hospital and asked, has his blood sugars been monitored? They said they'd send a nurse out, and they did, and his blood levels were 4.9. And I said that he needs to eat, otherwise he will have a hypo in the back of a police car. And at this point he was still in handcuffs, and his wrists were already sore from handcuffs. He'd been asleep in the back of a car. He was no problem at all. The police said he was quite quiet and things. So then he was taken into the hospital and carried on waiting until about 6 o'clock. And then the mental health team, the approved team that deal with the sectioning, asked to speak to me. So I explained about Sean's, autistic traits, and how he will shut down or, get stressed in certain situations, and that the whole situation could have easily been avoided if they had just contacted myself or his PA, or not going through or creating a big situation like this. I explained that to them, and I explained also that Sean suffered a lot of trauma, and that he also had been attacked in his flat about 2 weeks ago, and that had been reported to the police, and the police had advised him that after 8 o'clock at night he should keep his door locked and not open his door to just anybody. And he's been feeling really nervous anyway in the property, but he's been doing well in himself. He was gardening yesterday, he's been doing things, and we plan to spend the Easter holiday going out and having a nice roast dinner and things. But this evening they told me that they're keeping him in, and I told the mental health approved team that I disagreed with their decision because all he's done is exercise his right to say no. He said, no, I don't want this person in my home, I'm not comfortable. He said it politely, he was very respectful, he was concerned about the lady who'd then sat in a car outside. He was worried and said, you know, I think you should go. And that's all. But adult social care for years have tried to just get rid of me, erase me as his mum, and it's very hurtful to see that Sean, the next of kin, is recorded as the crisis team who don't know my son, they don't know anything about him, which last night demonstrated. They have now created a big problem. If one simple thing, if I'd have been contacted, we wouldn't be stood outside this hospital now and wouldn't be having this conversation, but this is not the first time. This has been going on for 13 years. For over 13 years. The hospital is a psychiatric hospital. I don't believe my son has a mental illness of that, you know, a psychiatric illness. He struggles to manage his type 1 diabetes. He has difficulty with executive functioning because of his ADHD and because of his autistic traits. So he forgets to do insulin at the time he needs to do insulin. And adult social care say that he makes a decision not to do insulin, therefore he's self-harming. So over the years we've had a vicious cycle where Sean can't remember to do his insulin. Without support and prompting, he will forget and he'll end up in hospital. But the irony of this is that because they've created this situation today, he's had no background insulin today at all, which is the insulin that keeps him alive. He's had no food, he hasn't had his ADHD meds, and when I went in at after 6 o'clock, after they'd decided to section him, he hadn't had anything to eat. So I went over to Asda to get him bits to have something to eat. And I can't believe I'm stood here today because of my son's autism, ADHD and diabetes. That hospital, I bet this constitutes to institutional abuse. And this is what it is. And I'm quite happy to stand up for that. Because my son should not be going through this year after year after year. You know, people are not listening to my voice and they're not listening to his voice. They're sectioning somebody for no reason at all. Then in 2010, he was a victim of a serious trauma. He's received no trauma support at all. I have been keeping him well in the community and doing all these things. All he did yesterday was say no. That was it. Because he said no, and because adult social care have the crisis team down as their next of kin, they're making decisions for Sean, and yet they're saying he makes unwise decisions. It's not my son that makes unwise decisions. It's Reading Borough Council and the ICB and this institutional abuse. That's all it is. And I just hope that while my son is in there, that he at least receives some support and care, but I very much doubt it, because today is already proven a type 1 diabetic left all night and all day with no food. They haven't even cared about his background insulin. All they're interested in is getting him in there to keep his mouth shut and to keep mine shut, but that's not going to happen. If they keep him in there, and I will exercise my right as nearest relative and get him out in 72 hours. If that doesn't happen, I will stay outside this hospital every single day, rain or sunshine, until they let him out and until they stop this institutional abuse and we start listening to people. Thank you for listening.